I want to give a big shout out to all my patrons, my Wildlings Knights watching Kingsguard. My Kingsguard include Brendan, Sarah, Nick, Pat, Oscar, Stuart, Josephine, Ikaika, Amanda, RJ, Shad, Nicoletta, Ezra, Jennifer, and Navi. Thank you all so much. You're the best. Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to be talking about Memories of Ice by Steven Erikson, Book 3 in the main 10 of Malazan. Oof. This is one of the most challenging, intimidating reviews I've ever done, which is appropriate because it's one of the most intimidating and also magnificent books I've ever read, to be honest with you. It's definitely in high contention for one of my books of the year. But Memories of Ice is going to be broken down into two sections in this review, non-spoiler and spoiler. I'll be sure to tell you when we're going to begin spoilers. No spoilers is going to be very brief because, honestly, I feel like a lot of people tuning into this now want to know my reactions of certain events that happen in this book because a lot do take place. But I do know that there are people who are curious because the first three of Malazan are always considered the books that you need to read to see if it's for you, and I think that makes a lot of sense. And that's where I'm going to begin my no spoiler thoughts, is I see why people recommend the first three. I also see why a lot of people say books 1 and 2 are almost like a prologue, setting you up to get into Malazan, and then Memories of Ice packs the punch wherever you can tell you're in or you're out. And it feels like this is where the series really begins. Like things start hitting the fan, and it's true. There is so much that happens here. It is extraordinarily dense. However, there's a lot of payoffs. And with that payoff comes a lot of death and despair and dread because Erikson doesn't let you have anything for free. And those are among my favorite authors, people who don't give us as the reader anything for free. And Memories of Ice is well earned. These are some of the biggest moments within the first three books. I mean, obviously, it feels like an exclamation point on this little first, I guess you would call it, arc in Malazan. And while Memories of Ice is extremely dense, and I was exhausted after reading it, it felt more rewarding than the first two books by far. And I can say for sure, which I already kind of knew, that I'm all in on this. And I do think after book 3, it feels like you would know whether or not this is for you. Also, just to let you know, I will be starting the Bone Hunters soon. I've actually already read books 4 and 5. I'm reading Knight of Knives now by Esselmont, and I'm actually really enjoying that. But just to give you some context, because I know a lot of people have been waiting for this review and they see that I've read ahead on Goodreads, but that's just how it is. I'm trying to space out the reviews to not overwhelm a lot of people, but I'm going into book 6 here in probably 2 or 3 weeks, and it does kind of feel like these first 3 are a little bit of an arc, and now knowing what happens in book 4 and 5, I do think that Memories of Ice is a great place to decide whether or not the series is for you. So yeah, in short, without getting into terrible amounts of detail, I loved it. I thought it was just an absolute banger. I thought it was epic upon epic upon epic moments, and this is military fantasy for sure. I know that now, and I know people have said that, but I was wondering what I would get out of Malazan, and that is at its core a military fantasy, and to the likes of which I don't think I've ever read anything quite this extraordinary when it comes to those things. And at its core, Memories of Ice is also inspecting a lot of things that have happened in the past that remain so mysterious, of hundreds of thousands of years of everything existing in this world. And I just love it. I love how the lore takes place here, and it comes to play things that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago affecting the now and the present and the characters that we're with. And there are some big revelations, but also some horrible gut punches, and also moments of triumph that, don't come free. And Memories of Ice, in my opinion, is definitely the best of the 3. I've read, like I said, all the way up into Midnight Tides now, and it's pretty close between Midnight Tides and Memories of Ice. I have to really think about it. I think I would probably lean more towards Memory of Ice because of how epic the scope is, even though I was exhausted after reading it. But we'll see, especially after I go over my notes of Midnight Tides, how I feel about that. But regardless, those are my no spoiler thoughts on this. And I'm sorry if it's a little bit scatterbrained, but I really have prepped way more for the spoiler section of this. But I wanted to include this for those who just wanted to check in and see how it was going, or maybe were curious to see how I reacted to the first 3. To see if maybe it's something that they would like. But at this time, I'm going to dive into spoilers because this might get very long, and I'm going to try to keep this under 30 minutes if I can. So if you're checking this out for no spoiler, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Like and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you again real soon. But for now, let's get to the spoilers. And disclaimer, I'm going to mispronounce a bunch of things here. I'm sorry, it is what it is. I'm just going to freak out a bit, and I'm going to be reviewing these in the parts because I took my notes while I read the parts. So if I ponder something in a part of
part 1 and it comes back in part 4 and I was wrong, you don't have to go write a comment, tell me I was wrong. I'm probably going to correct myself by the end. But if by the end I have missed something, please let me know down in the comments. Prologue flashback was absolutely astounding. I loved it. Kalor seems like the crappiest of crap when it comes to characters. He just seems like a bad guy. And I love the fact that Draconis' sword, Dragnapor, and how it was formed, and knowing that Rake, it seems, may have killed him to gather it. And then Lady Envy being Draconis' daughter. Like, this is all just like mind-blowing. And, you know, Erikson likes to trickle things in, and I feel like with the start of Memories of Ice and part 1 here, he is just laying it on thick, punch after punch, and I'm eating it up. And I was so ecstatic to see Tok the Younger back, and Tool. Tool was one of my favorite characters. Like, when people ask me, like, who are my favorite characters, I always seem to forget Tool, but he's up there. And I also love Tok the Younger, and the fact that him and Lady Envy and Tool are all going to be together, this little like trio, and then plus you have like the Demon Hound or whatever it is. I like it. I like where it's going, and I was immediately knowing that this book, I can see why people say it's of the best of the 3, and some people's favorite book in the entire series. And Tool's just so funny. He's like engaged with the Segula warriors. I hope I'm saying that right. And, you know, they're supposed to be some of the most feared, revered warriors in all of this, you know, this world. And Tool is monologuing and answering questions and talking and giving us information as he's fighting 2 of them. He's just so stoic and hilarious, and I just really, really love Tool. This first chapter was just steeped in big information, and I like the way that Erikson related to us. And how about Silver Fox is Tattersail and Nightchill combined in a body? Like, whoa, what is that? And she's feeding off her mother's life to grow up. Oh, as you know, if you watch my reviews, Tattersail is one of my favorite characters, probably my favorite characters from Gardens of the Moon, and we're just getting slapped with information by chapter 3, and I'm reeling from it. I'm like, oh my goodness, and then we're finding out, you know, that the fact that Silver Fox is Tattersail and Nightchill, and maybe something else, and she's going to be the leader of the Talon Amass. Oh my goodness. I was, you know, throwing my hands up, messaging friends, trying not to freak out, and trying to, you know, make sure that I don't go over my 100-page limit for Malazan a day so I don't get too confused. But it's just so impressive in these first 3 chapters how much more willing Steven Erikson is to give us this information. And I'm happy to see Tattersail, but another person that was mentioned that shows up here in part 1 of Memories of Ice is Kaladin Brood with that hammer. We finally see him on page. He's been talked about. Obviously, he's pretty legendary, so is that hammer. And we finally see him on page, and he delivers very much like Rake in some ways, but I feel like a little bit more, for lack of a term, like human, I guess. It seems like he's really mulling over decisions, seems a little bit more unsure of himself than Rake does, but he still has that aura of just badassery. And he obviously had his conversation with the crone, which I love to see the crone back, and I love how she's saying, you know, there's a really good chance that Silver Fox will reveal knowledge of the magic that is holding the Cripple God, and that somehow this fanatic, the Seers people are all tied into it, and the crone's here relaying information. But in her own right, the crone is very powerful, which is something I guess I didn't catch on to, or maybe it wasn't given to us in the first few books, but I was pumped to see her back because I just thought she was a great character. But also you see these power levels in Malazan are all over the place, and you start to think in your head who can beat who, and it's like one of my favorite things to do, and I'll sit around and just ponder it sometimes. But the crone is back, and the information that she's giving us and telling us, hey, Silver Fox is a really big deal, kind of sets the tone that things are going to get very tense with who knows what. Information just plays a huge role here, not just in part 1, but in Malazan as a whole. And it's also funny because Erikson plays the power game with us as the reader, giving us knowledge. Like I said, this is a very different type of book where he's just throwing things in our face, whereas the first 2 is a lot of pay attention and figure it out. So I think it's interesting that the relationship between us and Erikson is also mirroring what we're seeing in the story, where a lot of people are kind of bartering or positioning for more information. And if you pay attention to any point I make in this review, here in part 1, we get a piece of information that I don't understand why people don't mention this whenever they're selling Malazan as a series. We hear about postmodernism. We hear about, you know, the inspection of war and what it costs. But no one ever talks about how the fact that Spindle's mother's hair makes his shirt. His shirt is made of his dead mother's hair. You know, I'm here for that. I'm here for the absolute weirdest things possible, the most epic things possible. And Spindle's shirt threw me off. And I wrote that down and underlined it like 3 times. It felt like something that you would see in like Dark Tower, as I finished that up this year. I love that little detail, and I've been telling everyone that will listen about it, rather than harping on all of the amazing intricacies of the series, just that Spindle's shirt is made of his dead mother's hair. What in the world? I dreaded but also enjoyed the impact of Ganos finding out what's happened to his family with Tavor and Felison. It's pretty intense, and I actually think Ganos is a very sympathetic character, and he's probably my favorite character in this book, if not Tool. And he had a quote, and I really enjoyed it, and he says, "Among the dead beneath me, how many adult voices cried out for their mothers? Death and dying makes us into children once again. In truth, one last time, there in our final wailing cries." And Ganos is starting to learn that he has something to do with the Deck of Dragons here in part 1, which we figure out more later down the road. But he's also the Wanderer and the Sword, Dragnipur, and he survived, and he broke the chains from the cart. And Ganos just seems to be way more important than I initially thought that he would be. Obviously, Gardens of the Moon, there's some foreshadowing that he's going to be a big deal, but he comes into his own, especially even in part 1 where he's starting to figure it out as well. Oh, I'm sorry, not Ganos Paran. I'm talking about the master of the Deck of Dragons. What a cool name. What a cool title. Ganos, you my boy. And largely in part 1 of Memories of Ice, I think the best moments are whenever we see all these people coming together. I like action, okay? I like the big battles. I like the Chain of Dogs. I like all these things. But I find that Malazan, the things that pay off the most for me are when all these people get together and they cross paths, and it's the conversations. And Rake appearing here was one of the most amazingly, beautifully dark, atmospheric things I have ever read in my entire life. Seeing all these powerful characters in one place and Rake showing up, and everyone's reacting. Everyone's saying, "Oh my God, Rake is here. Like, brace yourselves, make sure your shirts are straight." And then we get to see him having conversations with people that we've never seen him on page with. And those conversations are among my favorite moments, not just in Memories of Ice, but the first 3 books in general. And it's through these conversations that we find out a lot more about the stakes and the overall plot here, right? Cripple God wants to get free. He's essentially creating this chaos within the Wurns, and he's going to kill Burn, who is sleeping, right? And that's like kind of how the time period syncs up. It's Burn sleep, which I never realized until this book, to be honest with you. And Brood's hammer seems to be the thing that could end it all. If Brood wanted to, he could end it all, and they could start new. And that poses a very big responsibility on Brood. And we find all this out through just some of the best dialogue that I've ever read. And the Panyan Doman is somehow related to the Cripple God, so I had that in the back of my mind. And as you can see, and you know this if you're watching spoiler, it's just so dense, but I loved it. And I'm glad that I took such extensive notes, which makes this review a little bit harder to do, but it also kept me on track and keeping the parts of the book in frame of mind. I'm going to butcher this, but the Kachane Chamale, and that's probably so bad, but the fact that they're an elder race and they're basically dinosaurs with swords for arms, it's funny, I've seen a lot of people say, that's too far, like that's so silly. That is not silly at all for me. That's badass, and it fits in Malazan because Malazan is very much a reimagining of what epic fantasy is. Very much a Tolkien of our generation, where pushing boundaries and reimagining a lot of the things that we think are fantasy. I loved it. And I don't know if Warrens and all this stuff wasn't enough to push you over the edge. I don't see why dinosaurs with swords for arms would do it. I happen to love it. And you can tell as soon as they're mentioned, people kind of like tremor at their names. They're a big deal. And they seem to be on the side of the Panyan Seer or the Panyan Doman or whatever. And that seems like big trouble. So that kind of ends out part 1. And I'm sitting there just like, okay, I got all this information. Now, what is Erikson going to do to me with all of this? And part 2 starts off very well. So, by the way, part 1, probably one of my favorite parts ever in Malazan. But part 2, I like the fact that we start to see point of views and perspectives from the Grey Swords inside Capustan. You can tell that this is probably going to be the site of the eventual climax, or at least one of the climaxes in the story. And I like the fact that the Kron Teal Mash show up and they're talking, and then we find out that there's a Jaghut word, and that Jaghut word happens to be Panyan, which, you know, the Panyan Doman and Panyan Seer. So are the Jaghut associated with this? Are they the Panyan Seer? You start to ask yourself that question here in part 2, and maybe that's why the Telan en masse are here. Maybe that's why they're having this big convergence, and maybe that has something to do with Silver Fox. And I mentioned the wolf earlier, or demon I said, but it's actually the A's, which are basically dire wolves in Malazan, and I like the fact that We get Talk Younger with the A, and we also get to hear his backstory, why he lost an eye, which is really good. Talk's awesome. Makes some pretty questionable decisions in this book, I think. But overall, what a sympathetic character, and you're always wondering about Talk the Elder and how that's going to play in down the series, because I don't believe that he's dead. Who knows? But I really, really liked the Dire Wolf edition. I mean, I'm always in for a good wolf. Oh, and Talk gets a new name. Arl, I believe is how you say it. And then Baljag, which is also probably... I'm sorry I mispronounce everything. I really am. I feel stupid, but there's only so many things I can remember in my head at one time. But Baljag, I believe, is the A's name. And I just love this little group it's building. You know, you got Lady Envy, you got Tool, you have Talk or Errol Fail or however you say it, and then you have your little Dire Wolf. And it's a good little companion to this group. And this is probably my favorite piece in who we follow in Memories of Ice. Oh, wait, what's that? Talk's dope friendship with his Dire Wolf and with Tool and dealing with Lady Envy is all over? Why? Oh, because Talk randomly takes a left turn and runs out and becomes a cannibal. Someone's got to defend this in the comments. Someone's got to let me know. I kind of understand he was looking at this and he said, I'm going to die eventually anyways. They're going to keep fighting these things. I am not, Tool. I am not one of the Segula. I'm not Lady Envy. I am not a Dire Wolf. I understand that, but then the other option being I'm going to run off with the Panyan Doman and become a cannibal, or part of at least the Fanatics. I don't know if I understand what my boy Talk was doing and for how bad of a decision this was. I mean, it's incredibly dumb because his life goes south, even more south, quicker, and goes through some of the worst things I've ever read a character go through. What in the world was that? I mean, it was literally like he's sitting there, he's staring, he's thinking, and then boom, he just makes this thing, runs over, and becomes a cannibal. Or at least runs with him. Why? Can someone tell me why? Please. I actually forgot to mention Gruntle in part 1. I know Gruntle is with the caravan and everything, and we thought he died, but now he's alive here in part 2. I'm going to be honest, Gruntle's probably one of my least favorite parts earlier in the book. I think at the end it kind of pays off pretty well, and I like where he ends up, but I was struggling to care for him in part 1 and 2 here. Brooke Halion showing Gethel absolutely no respect, even as a Herald of Hood. And he just responds, I'm Fenner's mortal sword, is outlandishly badass. And immediately brought me to his side where it's like, I want more of this guy now. As a big fan of Whiskey Jack and Kalam and that whole Fiddler, everybody, getting Rake and Whiskey Jack interacting and the respect that Rake ends up showing Whiskey Jack puts him over the moon as a character, but also giving us a lot of the backstory on how these bridge burners all came together. I love it. I could read like a whole novel series just about the bridge burners. I think everyone probably feels that way. It's meant to be that way, right? The Tennis Scrowry are absolutely insane. That's actually who Talk joined earlier. I see it in my notes here. It's not so much just Panyan Doman, but the actual Fanatics, and they are cannibals, and they are just absolutely terrifying, and they have something called the Children of the Dead Seed, which is basically a woman of this fanatical group will run out when a man's about to die and get impregnated by them against their will. So they will rape a dying man and become impregnated. And I mean, that's crazy. And then they have the kid and it's supposed to give it some sort of ability. I mean, this is among some of the darkest, grimmest things I've read in fantasy. It's weird to say that I really enjoy it because I think it's slightly demented, but it's also very creative. And it kind of shows you just how far gone these people are. And Anaster, who is a child of the Dead Seed and who has these powers, is leading them. And this is who Talk is now associated with. Talk, who we felt bad for, who has had such bad luck and been kind of pulled into all this reluctantly, is now with these crazy people. Part 2 is very good. Slower, but very good. And it's setting up these things that you can tell these last 2 parts are going to be just explosive. A lot of questions around the Panyan Seer and the Jag Hut and the Teal on a Mass and how this all relates. My prediction at this point when I was reading was the fact that I felt like the Jag Huts would be brought forth and that would keep the Teal on a Mass around because their whole idea was to exterminate the Jag Hut, and I thought that would give cause for the Teal on a Mass to not go away. I don't think that was necessarily correct, but I did want to put that out there that was the prediction I had ending of part 2. Let's dive into part 3. Part 3 starts off with Erikson doing something that he has done to me before, and it's taking a character that I really don't think I care about at all, like Gruntle, and doing some epic things with them and developing them and putting them in situations where they can rise up. And the fact that he goes and takes care of Stony after she just seems so distraught, And through all of this, we kind of start realizing that he might be Summer Trake reborn. And now I'm very curious about Gruntle after not caring about him for hundreds of pages. So hats off to Steven Erikson. You did it even with a character I thought I hated. Which also brings me to my point. I bet on a reread I would look back at the first 2 sections and now see a lot more foreshadowing. And there's probably stuff I missed. And Gruntle all along was probably awesome and I just missed it. I thought Silver Fox's explanation of why the Teal and Mass wanted to exterminate the Jackut was very compelling, and also the Chimmalal, or the dinosaurs with with swords for arms, were the parallel of this for Jaghuts and humans. And then now we have the Panyan Domin who are trying to exterminate. It just shows a pattern of oppression and a vicious cycle that has just plagued this world since the beginning of time. And now it's time to address the Krupp, we'll call them Krupp haters in the building. Listen, my boy Krupp, like Alan from Library of Alexandria hates Krupp, and I see all this hate. Listen, Kaladin Brood got all mad, stomped his feet, took that big hammer, which can end existence. And Krupp was not fazed. My man, I love Krupp. I'm over it. I'm not here to play both sides of the fence. I'm here to tell you that this is full-blown Team Krupp. The Fantasy Network supports Team Krupp. We are Baratheon loyalists, and now we are also Krupp loyalists, because Kaladin Brood and all his rage and his hammer couldn't move the eel. It's here in part 3 where I think Whiskey Jack takes another level up, and I thought his conversations with the break were really good, but he was providing a lot more context for the past of the Bridge Burners and all of his friends. Whiskey Jack has always been a character that gets popped up as one of people's favorites, and I liked him in Gardens of the Moon quite well, but I thought the crew around him was much better. I love Quick Ben probably the most out of all of them. However, Whiskey Jack here really comes into his own, and now I see why people talk about Whiskey Jack all the time. Whenever Krupp is talking to the 2 guards that are guarding Silver Fox, and they start talking about just how Whiskey Jack would have been an amazing ruler if he had just stepped up and taken that throne, and he had taken the power for himself, but he refused to do it, adds a whole nother layer to that character. A lot of people feel like he would have been better than Lysine by a mile, and just the admiration which his men it kind of reminds you of Eddard Stark actually a little bit, but there's a lot of people that pay homage to him that have a massive amount of respect, and seeing him through that lens shows what kind of respect he garners and the loyalty that he commands. Brockholian's death was really sad, and it was poetically written. It was really devastating for how short of time he had on page. I thought that he made a profound impact on this book. Canidus was sad, but man, I'm telling you, Ithcovians stepping up and saying, "I'm not done yet," is the stuff of legends, of fist-pumping reactions. I adored that moment. And that he's saying, "I'm Fëanor's shield anvil," mind-blowing. And we finally, here in part 3, get to see Capustan's battle happen, the siege and everything with it. And it is so bleak. One of the best battle scenes I've ever read. And I think this is what really puts this book over the edge as the other 2 books, because they have a lot of really good stuff and characterization and big moments. But the Battle of Capustan, or the siege, is just so terrible. There's bodies that are considered to be at an endless depth, almost like a sea, in how deep it is. And the scene of Gruntle battling his way is rough. It was rough, and it was real. Like, he's battling his way to the top, and they're describing bodies up to his chest. In the way that Erikson is able to describe battle, it's not just a scene setting, it's a very emotional thing. And there's also, the people who didn't even really want to be there, and just death and despair. And I feel like the humanity was really well captured. I really just want to put Erikson over really quick for his prose. He has a line here during the battle. It says, "The air of the concourse blackened as 1,500 bows whispered as one." Chef's kiss. Beautiful, beautiful writing. And then we get to bounce back to our boy Talk here in part 3, and he's an idiot, and he's going through some of the most heart-wrenching torture I've ever seen, and it bums me out because I loved him. Why did you have to do this? I hope someone in the comments explains why he did this to give me some justification for it, because it's a bum. It's like he's being transformed almost into the Chalmalay, or a dinosaur with... I'm just going to call him the dinosaurs with sword arms because I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. It's bothering me. But also he's having dreams, and you start to realize that Maybe's dreams, which is the mother of Silver Fox it's being fed off of, are kind of in parallel, and Talk is seeing them through the A's eyes, or the direwolf's eyes. And I really, really like that, and it kind of kept me going with Talk after being so furious with him for making such a dumb decision. Quick Ben and Talamandus going through the Warrens, giving us a little bit more, and also standing up to the gods saying that we're going to make these decisions. We're not just going to sit around and let them do it. We're going to dictate our futures. Was a very welcomed storyline in this. One of my favorite parts of this book, and Quick Ben is definitely a top 5 character. I mean, how could you hate Quick Ben? And I thought Talamandus was also a really good addition. And among that, the people who really are standing up to the gods are Gruntle and Ganos. These are people who are being given now new positions of power that are heavily dictated. They should feel almost privileged to be chosen by the gods. And they're saying, no, I didn't want this, but now I have it, and I'm going to do what I think is right. And there's a lot of liberation in Memories of Ice. And I think with Ganos and Gruntle, and then also you have Ikovian making up big stands, it's just really, there's a lot of pride in this book and a lot of fist-pumping moments, which I'm always here for. That is what makes epic fantasy epic to me, with the stakes also so high, which I've already obviously covered here in part 3, were delivered on, especially with the Siege of Capustan. In the scene where Rake is executing the women of the Dead Seed with Dragnapur and Whiskey Jack stops him and does it himself, seemingly as a mercy to the woman, is possibly the best character scene so far in this entire series in the first 3 books. The subtle lines of dialogue that take new meaning in the depth it now adds to not only Whiskey Jack, but Rake as characters and also their relationship is outstanding. Whiskey Jack realizes the mercy Rake mentioned was not of the women, but for Whiskey Jack himself, to not bear that burden and to do the executions in front of his own soldiers. What a moment. I mean, that's gorgeous storytelling any way you cut it. And by this, we now know that Whiskey Jack is the true leader. And he's also the biggest threat to Lysine, which is, interesting thinking, considering that Lysine seems to be off her rocker just a little bit. Darujhistan wasn't about killing the bridge burners, but about killing off Whiskey Jack. And here at the end of part 3, the one prediction or thing I was thinking was the talk of all these wolf gods, and there's 2 of them, made me start thinking about Talk and Maybe, and seeing if those 2 would be the ones that would fulfill those 2 roles and kind of ascend. And then part 4 starts off with a bang and a huge reveal, to me at least, and it's the Night Death that's talking to Cole is Bodden from Deadhouse Gates. He now serves Hood? That's huge. I didn't expect to see Bodden again. I thought that was just, I don't know, maybe people didn't think that was a big of a deal, but I remember putting down the book and being like, what? And I had to go confirm it with the guide and stuff because I wanted to make sure that I had it right. And it was here in part 4 where, obviously I'm loving these books and I'm telling you about all these favorite parts, but this is where Malazan probably entered my top 5 series of all time. Definitely top 10, but probably my top 5 was when Ganos had a conversation with Draconis about Dragnapur inside of Dragnapur. The atmosphere in which they spoke made it so enthralling, the new information that's being delivered, and the fact that everything mentioned has so much purpose. I feel like Steven Erikson didn't waste a word in this conversation. And again, my favorite parts of Malazan continues to be the conversations. And I guess it's time to talk about the fact that here in part 4, we lose Whiskey Jack. Whiskey Jack's gone, and all I could say was, God damn it. I was so upset. Calor is such a piece of trash, and I hate him. And I just felt heartbroken for Kalat. I'm really bummed, honestly, that Whiskey Jack's gone in this story. But I hope he comes back, because death isn't in Malazan what it is in a lot of the other series. And it makes you wonder, things like, why didn't he ever get his legs fixed? Or his leg, it was one leg. You wonder why he never got that fixed, and he never took the time to do it. I think it might be tied to maybe the fact that Calor isn't supposed to die due to his curse, and Whiskey Jack had him dead, so the leg had to break. Which means in Malazan that the future actions of our characters are actually already set in stone to keep these curse and prophecy constructs in place. That's a very big overarching thing to think about when we think about the Malazan books, right? And I think that this could be the first sign that things are set in stone. Is there free will in this universe? I'm not sure. Aranthos being Tae-Shren was pretty obvious in my opinion, but I still really liked it. It's one of those examples where predictable isn't always a bad thing, as long as it's executed well, which it was here. I'm excited to see where Tae ends up after this reveal, because the more we go into the series, the more we're learning about Lysine and her plans, and also about the Siege of Pale, and what really happened there, because it turns out it's not as straightforward as we thought. And then we get to Ikovian dying, which I thought was a bit weird. He took all the pain from the Tiamat and then he died for it. which I think essentially was him being the embodiment of compassion based on the quote towards the end there. And I guess that is something that we need to think about as we talk about concepts and themes within Malazan Book of the Fallen. So Ikovian taking this stand and doing this was very unexpected and not a preconceived notion at all for what he should have been doing, which also Ganos does, Silver Fox does. So you're starting to see the subversion of hundreds of thousands of years of history based on the individuals, which is so funny because people talk about how, there's not really a personal narrative within Malazan and that you don't get in the characters' heads just as much, which some of that might be true. However, you're seeing individuals make very big stances based on what they believe. And one person like Ikovian or Ganos or Silver Fox can change the course of history in the Malazan universe. And I think that Erikson, even with the way that he approaches his characters, is kind of making a commentary on all of this. He's relaying the story in these events from like a macro perspective, but now we see the micro taking hold. And then if you're wondering, how I felt about the talk, at this point, I like talk, but he made that dumb decision and all the stuff he's went through. I'm along for the ride. I don't have any expectations because at the end of this, it seems that he has died, but he's carrying the soul of Tog, and he's in Anaster's body, who was a child of the Dead Seed, and he's essentially the mortal sword of Tog. I'm not totally sure where this ended up. All I know is that it was weird as hell, and Tog's storyline is one that kind of just diverted in this book and has went off a complete cliff. Though I'm still entertained. I'm not complaining, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's just I guess I'm just along for the ride when Tog hits the page, because I can't predict what this dude's going to do or where he's going to end up, and I guess now he's in Anaster's body. So, there you go. And all the way to the end of this part 4 and the end of the book, we're getting reveals, and I love finding out that Lady Envy helped Rake kill her father, which I have to assume that's how Dragnapor got to Rake then. Lady Envy is a very interesting character, and a lot of people, I haven't heard a lot of people mention her, but I am excited to see where she goes from this, and the amount of respect that she gives Rake is very telling. Not that we needed any more justification that Animander Rake is a badass and very important, but Lady Envy adds another perspective from him from hundreds of thousands of years ago in ancient relationships. All the way to the end, we're getting these big reveals. And in a feel-good moment, my boy Toll, who I love, and I've said it's one of my favorites, he gets laid. Good for you, Toll. Good for you, man. And then the big reveal at the end is that, ladies and gentlemen, Duker's alive. He's alive. After all of that happened at Deadhouse Gate, Duker lives. This book is ridiculous. This book had so much to it. One of the densest books I've ever read, and one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. This was an absolute challenge to read, but also a challenge to review. I hope I did a good job of relaying things that resonated with me. I didn't want to do too much of a recap on all the summaries of the events, and I felt like breaking it down into parts made this a lot more manageable. I really hope that you enjoyed this review, because the Malazan fans are so dedicated and have been really supportive of my channel since I started this series, and I really appreciate it. And I really want to thank you for taking time out to help educate me, help challenge even some of my views on this series. I've had nothing but good discourse with the fandom thus far, and I'm really proud to be a part of it, and I'm proud to be making this content, and I hope that this video came across not too scatterbrained or ranty. From here on out, it's going to be discussions. It's going to be discussions with each book with my review thoughts baked into it, because at the end of the day, I've been sitting in front of this camera now for almost an hour. I've cut a bunch of stuff, I'm sure, about this final cut and this final edit that you're going to see. I need to have more dialogue, and I like having the chat there on the live streams to also go in, because we need to come together. We got to come together and put our minds together to figure out so many of these intricate, in-depth ties. And this is a series that I just want to talk about more. So for my reviews from now on are going to be discussion based. I'm going to have various guests on. And don't worry, you will know how I reacted to certain things, and they will be full spoilers. I want to try to do 1 to 2 of those a month till I get caught up. Like I said, I've already read up to book 5 and I'm reading Night of Knives now, which will have a normal review. This is my review for the month of October, but I'd like to get the discussion for House of Chains out maybe right at the beginning of November and try to get it caught up for where I am with the books, because I've been trying to read 1 a month, and I'd like the reviews to kind of stay consistent with that, so I don't have to forget all of the little details that happen when I do the spoiler discussions. But yes, that's my future plans. Like I said, I'm definitely going to bring on different people. I'd really like to talk to Iskar. Iskar, if you're watching this, I'd love to talk to you, man. Hit me up in the comments. Well, let's change numbers and stuff, and let's get you on here, because there's so much to talk about. And I love Malazan, And I love the fandom. I really do. It's been nothing but a positive experience for me. And the fandom, Steven Erikson, these books, everything is subverting my expectations of what to expect from people and also from fantasy. And this was the exclamation point on this first arc to bring us into the world and see a lot of the payoffs and the consequences. And it was phenomenal. This book was absolutely one of the best books I've read all year, the best of the first 3, and having read on to book 5, one of the best books it seems going to be in the series. So thank you so much for spending your precious time with me. And again, I hope that these thoughts came across less ranty than it feels right now. But I appreciate you checking this out. If you want to support me on Patreon, that's down in the description. Optional, but always appreciated. There's a lot of cool stuff there. You get a Discord. Also, the higher tiers, you can actually recommend books to me that get spun on a random wheel, which is a lot of fun. But make sure to hit like and subscribe. Helps me out here on the channel. And I guess that's it for Memories of Ice. Feels like an accomplishment, not just to read it, but also to finally get this review done. We're Team Krupp. Talk to Younger's an idiot. And I love what I'm getting from this series. So until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page.